Hi and welcome back to my channel. So today's video, I'm going to be going a little bit more into detail about what it's been like tracing my genealogy and my family tree. Now, if you've been on my channel before, you will be familiar, had to get a little yawn out. You'll be familiar with some videos that I've posted previously. One where I was talking about my paternal great-great-grandmother, and then another one where I'm talking about my maternal great-grandmother. Basically, the one about my maternal great-grandmother, who we call Kitty, her story was an inspiration for me starting to research my family tree. So I'm gonna try and keep this video brief, but just wanted to talk about some things about, like I said, tracing my family tree. So one of the things that I started with was just trying to start with like a paper trail. So I started by looking, at census records, birth certificates, draft cards, newspaper articles, all those types of things that kind of start to fill in the blanks of my family tree. And something that's interesting too is, like, for a lot of these family members, I knew their names, I just didn't know details attached to their lives. And it's interesting all the different places that your family tree will be documented, because in my baby book, all 4 of my grandparents are listed by name, and all of my great-grandparents are listed as well. So like, the names of these people were already known to me, so that kind of made it easier to begin to find information about them as well. Now, once I started looking at like these documents, then it starts to line up with like family stories that have been passed down. Now, in my family, the 2 people that are kind of like the keepers of like the family lore, for my maternal side, it's my mom. And for my paternal side, it's his first cousin. And they had so much detail in terms of like names and places, especially my cousin, because when I started doing my family tree, I think I like found something, because I was using Ancestry.com, and I had found some type of document, and I remember I asked this cousin, her brother, about it, and he's like, I wouldn't really know about that, you should ask my other cousin, right? And then she proceeded to send me like all of this great stuff, like I said, birth certificates, pictures of my grandparents that I'd never seen, like a whole bunch of like really great stuff. And the best part was, back in the 90s, before my great aunt passed away. So when I grew up in Kansas, in Overland Park, Kansas. It's a suburb of Kansas City, Missouri. And it just so happens that my father's uncle and his wife had retired to the suburb over, which is Olathe, Kansas. So that was a nice family link that we had. And that great aunt, a couple of months before she passed, my great grandmother's first cousin, for whatever reason, sent her this letter that was like this extremely detailed family history all the way back to slavery of that side of the family. And it's just like, it's amazing, just all the detail in it. And then also what made it so great and helpful is that they actually wrote down a very detailed family tree of that line of my family, and it does go all the way down to me and some of my other cousins on that side. So it got down pretty far in like generations. Of course, now we're all grown up and some of us have kids, but it was great, and I was just so appreciative that she sent that to me. So that was definitely helpful. And what helped me start looking up everything is I did use Ancestry.com. So initially, I know people know Ancestry.com because of like the DNA test that you can do, but I was really mostly using it initially to have access to different types of documents. Now, of course, you don't have to use a website like that to start trying to find documents like that. It's fairly easy if you want to do it that way. So that was the website that I was doing, and at that time, or using rather, and at that time, my older sister had done the DNA test through Ancestry, and the cousin that I'm talking about, she had done hers through 23andMe, and then her daughter also did one on Ancestry, and then I got my parents to do one. So I know people have their own feelings about doing the DNA test, spitting in a tube. Let me just say this. am a person that fully believes in conspiracy theories. So if you're the type of person that's afraid of sending your spit away because you don't know what it's being used for, my whole thing is I'm already paranoid. I already feel like the government knows everything about me anyway. So my spit in a tube to find out my DNA is the least of my worries. But anyway, around the same time, we all did our DNA tests and got them back. And one of the things that I thought was interesting, because I had a couple of family members to cross-reference, is seeing all like the overlap with what you inherit and all of that type of stuff, between me and my sister and then both of my parents. And what's interesting about that is sometimes people think of genetics as like a perfect 50-50 split, and it's not really like that. And so looking at my parents is interesting because obviously it's not an exact 50-50. You get this DNA from your dad, you get this DNA from your mom. But all of our ethnicity estimates, the percentages were almost identical. So that part was interesting to see that it's not like a 50-50 split, but it's pretty much identical to my parents. So that was pretty cool. So like I said, now when you do these tests are not supposed to like tell you, because you can get tested, help you find out if you have like genetic diseases, disorders, stuff like that. That's not what these tests that are sold for. They're sold for like ethnicity estimates, and they are estimates. They're not like supposed to be taken as 100% accuracy. It's just estimates of what your ethnic background would be, right? And so with mine, my overall percentages were 72% African, 27% European, and 1% Native American. And I've watched like a bunch of videos of people doing their results. And so from what I've seen, there's of other Black Americans, that type of percentage breakdown is pretty similar, or I've seen like lots of different ones that breakdown is pretty similar to mine, right? Now, what I do also like about that, though, is that based on your ethnicity estimates, they will then trace it to communities that you belong to in the country that you live in. So they have a really interesting breakdown, actually, in my opinion, of African American communities in America, which I think is fascinating when you have this conversation about African American ethnicity, because people really like to play dumb when it comes to conversations about identity. But at any rate, to me, that was the part that was most interesting to me, because the communities that, and they update it, like as when they get like new information, they will update your results based on that. So my communities have changed, but not too much, and they are pretty spot on to the places my family is from in the South. So I just thought that was so cool. I mean, the overlap in all those places: Arkansas, Tennessee, Texas, Mississippi, Alabama, like that very specific region where all of my family is from, that matches up with the census records of where everybody was born. And just to see that migration of being like on the eastern seaboard of the South, which is where like the initial slaves were bought, and then their move into the deep South, and then eventually all of my family, for the most part, ending up in either Arkansas or Tennessee, and then from there, the Great Migration, and my family mostly ending up in Chicago, Detroit, and St. Louis. So I don't know, it was just, that part to me meant more than like the overall estimates, because it related more to my identity as a Black American. So I thought that was really cool. Especially because it also breaks down like how your ancestors probably got there based on the slave trade and slavery in America. Like, it's really interesting to me. Now, my top percentage overall is African, which is no surprise. I'm Black. And so they do update this every now and again, but pretty much it stayed the same. So my top African percentage is from Nigeria, and it's 34%. And then my second highest percentage, like overall, is from Scotland, and that's also my highest European percentage, and that is at 16%. And the thing that's interesting about that is that really didn't tell me anything that I hadn't like already assumed about my genetic makeup as a Black American. If anything, it more or less made me feel more connected to the family I already know, you know, seeing the overlap with my sister or my parents or my cousins. Like, that part stood out more to me, right? And especially like I was talking about with the southern communities, because I have grown up primarily in the Midwest, born in Chicago, grew up in Missouri, Kansas. I live in Michigan, like very Midwestern through and through, except for my brief stint in the East Coast in New Jersey. But like, I really don't always think about my Southern roots. You know, I've never been to those places. I haven't been to Arkansas. I haven't been to Tennessee. So to see that connection and know that that's where all of my family is from, my grandparents, my great grandparents, and how being from there informed their personalities and how they raised my parents, that's just so amazing. And I feel like, you know, with doing these DNA testings, people treat it, especially with Black Americans, like knowing those estimates is going to change how we identify ethnically. Because I wouldn't now go around saying that I'm half Nigerian and half Scottish. That's just a composite of things that make me African American. And I think, like I said, people like to kind of be deliberately obtuse about that reality. And it's like, is it interesting? Definitely. But my actual ethnic identity is tied to those groups being a part of what makes me a Black American whose family is from the South, who ended up on the South Side of Chicago. So, yeah. And so, yeah, just in conclusion, you know, with Black Americans specifically, because of slavery, when we're tracing our genealogy and doing our family trees, it can be difficult. And people really make it more difficult, in my opinion, because they immediately go to the DNA of where we're from in Africa. And this idea that it's like you can't pinpoint specifically where you're from in Africa. And it's like, well, no, obviously you can't. And so people stop there, assuming that because you can't go that deep, you can only get like estimates like this DNA test, that you can't find out where you're from. And I have traced my family back so far to like 4th grade grandparents, and they're all from here, from America. And it's like, that's the interesting thing about identity and like being a part of the American story. Black Americans are not immigrants. Okay, we don't have a packaged Ellis Island type of story. Okay, and people try and compartmentalize us into that story because that's the story that is sold globally, and that's just not the case. And you are not ever going to be able to tell our story without talking about slavery, without talking about racism. And it's like, that's not all that we are, but you're not about to erase that that's part of who we are, right? So it is definitely not impossible, and you will find your relatives, and it'll just make your family story more enriching once you start down that path. So, I mean, you can use websites. Like I said, I've used Ancestry.com, but certainly that's not necessary. Like, something that I really want to do, of course, I don't know when I'm going to get the chance now, is I've been interested in going to Arkansas, like going to Little Rock, Pine Bluff, the places where I know my family was from specifically, and like, you know, going to like a local library or city records, like, you know, places like that where you'd be able to get, you know, more detailed information, or even, you know, maybe finding a place where a relative was buried, something like that, you know, just, you know, ways in which you can find this information about your family. It's, you know, very interesting. And probably the funniest thing, the cutest thing that has happened is, you know, after Sinners, that got a lot of Black Americans thinking about their family history after watching that movie. And so I saw this TikTok. It was like a TikTok trend of people showing like their background. And this woman who's from Chicago was showing her estimates. And I said, hey, my family's from Chicago and my estimates are pretty similar to yours. And she responded and she went, hey, cousin. And it's just so funny because it's like, maybe we are. We don't know. We could actually be cousins, like through blood or just cousins because we're the same ethnicity. And in the end, it doesn't really matter. It's just, that was just so cute to me. And to me, that's one of the things that's rewarding about, finding out your history and finding out where you're from. So that's just a little background on my genealogy experience. It's not done really. It's ongoing, right? But what I have found so far has been so helpful, especially because I only got to meet one of my grandparents. All of my other grandparents had passed away before I was born. So to kind of meet them for the first time through doing this, research has just, like I said, has been very rewarding. So I don't know if I'll put links about any resources that I've used, but I think I will. But yeah, just wanted to share that. I hope it has been enlightening, educating, enjoyable, whatever. And thanks for watching.